Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's QuiC QWave Webinar. I'm David Morquende, Network Manager at European Quantum Industry Consortium, QuiC, and I will be today your host. Today we'll have this wonderful presentation plus panel about the Oxford Economics Impact Report. And also we will talk about the benefits of the quantum computing to the UK economy. I'm happy to have here two wonderful speakers. So Logan, Director of Oxford Economics, and Gerald Mullally, Interim CEO of Oxford Quantum Circuit. Let's start, as always, a little bit about QuiC. So QuiC is a non-profit association established back in 2021, and we have a strong focus on the quantum ecosystem in the industry in Europe. So our mission actually is to strengthen the quantum technology industry and position Europe as a global leader of this sector. We have several verticals and several working groups that you can be involved with by being a member. We have now plus 200 members across 20 countries, and we hope to keep growing and to keep grow the ecosystem within Europe and also in quantum tech. Feel free to visit our website. Also, I want to share a little bit of QExpo. QExpo is our flagship event. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago, and we are happy that you could join. For the ones who actually join, if not, you will have another chance in 2026 because QExpo is coming back. Just a little bit about the numbers and things that went well. We had plus 52 speakers, 23 exhibitors, and 7 sponsors. This was a 2-day event with the first event focused on the exhibitors and the second more on a speaking base. We have more than 800 registrations from more than 20 different nations, and we have end users, investors, industry leaders, also representatives from national and European governments and international organizations. So make sure to engage with our social media and prepare for next year's. Okay, now that I have introduced a little bit about QuiC and a little bit about QExpo and how it was, let me introduce actually our speakers for the panel. So first, Andy Logan will be talking and introducing the report, and also we'll have a panel with Gerald and Andy later. So Andy Logan is a director at Oxford Economics, where he undertakes studies forecasting the demand for companies' products, analyzing the drivers of different industry growth, and assessing the size of different markets and industry. He also investigates the competitive pressures and opportunities facing industries now and in the future. And prior to joining Oxford Economics, Andy worked in a variety of economics roles at the Bank of England for 15 years. His research focused on the labor market, commodity producer prices, UK trade flows, and the performance of UK banks. So let's introduce him and come him in. Hello, Andrew. Happy to hear you here. And also Gerald. Gerald is the interim CEO of Oxford Quantum Circuit. I'm gonna get him in. Hello, Gerald. And
hi, David.
He expressed the company's vision, strategy, and commercialization. Oxford Quantum Circuit, for those who don't really know, it's the UK's leading superconducting circuit quantum computing and quantum as a service, quantum computing as a service company. Now developing its 4th generation system. It was the first company globally to deploy its systems into co-location data centers, enabling highest security, lowest latency access for its customers. And prior to us for quantum thinkers, Gerald was a director at the UK Prime Minister offices and Cabinet Office. responsible for leading national security-related program internationally. So also, thank you, Gerald. As I was saying, we are going to start with Andrew with a little bit of context and an introduction about the report. So I'm gonna put this slide. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you very much. And very nice to meet everybody. So the report is designed to explain the quantum industry as it stands at the moment in the UK. It is designed to investigate what the industry might become and the benefits it might bring to the wider economy if the industry is appropriately funded and if it gets the funding it requires. So the figures here are some of the benefits that we can see that the industry will potentially might bring in 2045. But let me start by going through different parts of the report, and I'll come back to this slide if I may. The starting point of the report is to look at where the industry is at the moment. We do that by looking at the number of quantum-only firms. And we find that there are 52 quantum-only firms in the UK at the moment. We look also at where do they originate from. So we look at which of them are sort of startups from UK universities, which UK universities, if they are startups, or whether they come in from abroad and are sort of foreign-owned firms or subsidiaries of foreign-owned firms. So we look at the sort of what I might call the business demography of the industry as it stands at the moment. And we sort of delve into the sort of hardware firms, and we delve into the software firms, and we look also at some of the sort of larger players, the IBMs of this world, and to see what they're doing. To the extent you can find out what activities are they up to within the UK. The report then goes on to look at the funding of quantum in the UK. It sort of gives a sort of plotted history of the UK's funding record, the government public funding of quantum in the UK, and it compares the UK's approach to some other prominent Western and sort of China and Russia, etc., sort of their funding of quantum computing research in various countries. And it finds that the UK's funding is relative to its competitors. The UK has taken a different approach. Both the value of the funding has been relatively small versus countries like France and Australia, but it also shows that the UK has sought to spread the funding very widely around different quantum firms to try and cover, and sort of university departments to try and sort of fund lots of different types of activity, rather than conversely the sort of French approach, where they seem to have focused on sort of relatively few quantum companies, but given them vast sums of money to try and develop their procedure, to develop their processes and operations. We also look at who is funding, which bits of UK government are funding quantum within the UK. So you'll find that it's largely out of the sort of science department and the innovation department, whereas for some other countries, they focus the funding comes out of the defense department. But that's important because particularly since the global situation, Russian invasion of Ukraine, etc., defense budgets around the world are going up, whereas perhaps sadly science budgets aren't increasing to the same extent. But we're trying to sort of see to what extent are UK firms receiving competitive amount of funding from government relative to their rivals who may and are getting much more. We then look at the industry as it stands at the moment in the UK, and we estimate in 2020, 2024 that 1,052 people were employed in the quantum industry at the moment, and they contribute 135 million pounds to UK GDP. We also look at the impact of the industry's procurement. So the industry will buy lots of different things to sort of move forward, lots of inputs of goods and services, and the industry also pays wages, and you can see that, and that stimulates economic activity around the UK economy. So in total, we estimate that currently the economic contribution of the quantum industry is £435 million contribution to GDP, and just over 5,000 jobs are currently supported within the UK due to the existence of the quantum sector. We then, without having a crystal ball, we then look forward to what the quantum industry itself might become in the future. And we do that by borrowing a technique that's used to look at the impact of AI. It's pioneered by a very famous French economist called Philippe Aghion. And he looks at what's happened to past IT revolutions to try and predict what will happen to AI in the future. And we've basically borrowed the same technique, and we've tried to map forward or forecast forward using different periods from around the globe that we think echo what might happen to quantum in the future. So we think, we project forward to estimate that by 2045, there might be somewhere between 30,000 to 150,000 jobs in quantum computing, in the quantum computing industry, and through its procurement and through induced impacts through the payment of wages. And it might support up to £11 billion worth of GDP in the UK economy. Now, that's great and be fabulous for the people who work in the quantum sector, but the real benefits that quantum computing is going to bring are the impact for the rest of the economy, the whole economy. So we estimate that the UK economy by 2045, under various assumptions about when quantum will become widely adopted and fully effective, we estimate that by 2045, whole economy productivity in the UK will be between 7 and 8% larger than it currently is. Productivity is important because that's what an economy can produce. So if I take that into GDP terms, that would estimate, we would estimate that that might mean the UK has 212 billion in extra GDP through the productivity benefits that quantum might bring by 2045. Where do we expect those benefits to come? The fastest growing industries whose productivity will benefit, we are forecasting that that will be pharmaceuticals and electrical manufacturing. We expect their productivity to go up by about 50%. We also think that defence manufacturing up 33% productivity, and business services 32% growth in their productivity. Some of the sort of lesser growing industries are things like sort of financial services, chemical products, agriculture, but even they see growth of well in excess of 20%, the first two, 10% for agriculture. So at that point, we estimate the benefits that sort of bring. One thing we can't quantify is the sort of new discoveries, the things that we don't know what's coming down the pipeline in terms of sort of new research and new products, new services, new ways of doing things. So we don't try and do that. But on the whole, we've tried to paint a picture of what quantum might become in the UK if it's appropriately funded. So I'll leave you with that slide. If you move to the next slide, David, there's a QR scanner for reading the report for those that are interested. But at that point, I pass back to you, David.
Thank you so much. Indeed, please scan the QR code if you're interested. Also, share it in social media. I will try to put also in the comments or in the chat the actual link, just in case someone needs it. But yeah, thank you so much. Let's get into a more panel view. Yeah, here we are. So we are now in the panel, and I believe that the thing that you told us is really impressive, and of course, by reading about all the things that you state and everything, we can see that quantum is more than qubits and and more about the technology. It's also about productivity, about jobs, about sovereignty. So I'm going to start with the first question, open to both of you. So actually, how big is quantum's economic upside, and which verticals will feel it first?
So as we've just said, we're expecting when quantum is widely adopted, and there's various points we can model when that might occur, that we think that that will bring productivity growth of about 7%, 7 to 8%. We estimate that that is equivalent to about £212 billion worth of UK GDP. The sectors that we think will do very well from quantum and see growth in their productivity are pharmaceuticals, are electrical manufacturing, defence, and sort of business services. Those are the ones that we think are going to grow. Their productivity is going to grow the most rapidly. I don't know if Gerald wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Firstly, just to say it's a huge thank you to Oxford Economics for a really great report. We commissioned this report alongside IBM in addition, and I think it's been really great working with Andrew over the last period to produce something which we think is quite a robust analysis of the economic impact of quantum. I think maybe one of the things I would suggest about the opportunity is just how we approached ensuring that we were ambitious in terms of what could be possible, but also put in scenarios that are a little bit more conservative. So the way we did that was that we framed it in terms of the UK quantum missions. And the first milestone in the missions is to reach about 1 million quantum operations, which is mega QuOP, or QuOP being quantum operations. And that's the first time that quantum will move past the capabilities of classical compute. And you'll see improvements across certain number of sectors, but it's pretty narrow advantage at that stage. The second milestone is 1 billion quantum operations, and that's known as giga QuOP, and that's when you do see broader advantage. So faster drug discovery, better batteries, and larger scale impacts across financial services, but also national security. And the third milestone is 1 trillion operations, quantum operations, or tera QuOP. And that's where I think we see the more transformational impacts across our society. That era will also have significant implications for national security and for governments more generally. I think what Andy and team did really well, and the report does really well more generally, is to provide 2 scenarios for how fast we move through these milestones to adopt quantum across our economy. And firstly is a more conservative scenario whereby breakthroughs and adoption occurs at a slower pace. And we see those significant economic impacts by the mid-2040s. And that's the numbers that you just saw on the slide before. But secondly, we also put in a more ambitious scenario. And this is more in line with some of the roadmaps that we would see from, in the industry currently and our own roadmap, in addition to the timeframes of the quantum missions from the UK policy point of view. And we move much faster on that basis with breakthroughs and adoption, realizing impacts within the next 10 years. Now, that if that early adoption occurs, it adds approximately £102 billion to the UK economy over and above the other scenario by 2040. So it's a significant opportunity in terms of the pace at which we can actually accelerate the development of the technology, but also adoption across the economy. It's led by companies, of course, but it's enabled by governments. And that's the opportunity, I think, for both the UK and for Europe. I'll pause there just in case there's anything else Andy wants to say, and then I might just focus on one sector just to bring it to life a little bit.
I haven't got much to add, Gerald.
Okay, I'll focus in a little bit on one sector, and maybe just to bring it to life for any of the policymakers that might be listening in on this, and also the kind of economic impacts of that sector. In the early days of OQC, we were actually challenged by a bank that their data could not leave their 4 walls. They weren't talking about their physical walls, they were talking about their digital infrastructure or their data center network. We were, as David mentioned, the first company in the world to integrate quantum directly into those data centers. And that's the entire base of that is to speed up adoption with respect to financial services. So there's going to be lots of barriers that we need to address within the market, that the industry needs to do to ensure that there's faster adoption. It's not just a government policy type approach. There's lots of stuff that we need to do. But in the UK, if you look at one sector like financial services, I think the report identifies it's about 9% of total economic output in the UK. It's profoundly important to the UK economy, and quantum will have a transformative effect on it. As the report finds, this could be as high as 24% productivity improvement within the next 15 years. Now, financial services firms are already adopting quantum. They're working across everything from optimization of their portfolios, pricing derivatives, credit scoring, anti-money laundering, and also fraud detection. And maybe to bring it to life in terms of the economic impact for it, if you look at fraud detection, there are about 3 million cases and about £1 billion stolen through fraud in the UK each year. There's some really great work by HSBC here in the UK about quantum algorithms that can actually increase fraud detection by 15% over and above classical alternatives. Now, what we require a system that can run millions of quantum operations before a logical error occurs. In other words, you need a mega QuAP system to be able to run that algorithm. When we have that, though, we'll be able to return £150 million per year to the UK economy, and more importantly, save hundreds of thousands of people from the pain of fraud. I think that's a really a good one from a financial services point of view. I think if we step back from the report itself, I love the stat on adding the equivalent of £7,500 every household in the UK. That's extraordinary in terms of its economic impact.
Wow, actually, the numbers are amazing. And as you address, it's not only about one of the algorithms that you said about optimization portfolio. It's not always about getting more money. It's about like defending ourselves and not losing that kind of amounts. And I feel that that's amazing. On top of that, and talking a little bit about the policy and other verticals, well, at QExpo, we had the UK delegation, so that's for sure. Like the collaboration must exist. And on the other hand, another vertical that I really like is about the pharma industry, because it has the same defense algorithms that they need for the banking. So our money is important, but our health is really important too. And also there are algorithms, and quantum computing can really help on that. Following about these things that we are talking about, the problems or the future algorithms or the solutions that we need to achieve in order to solve this. A question for Andrew, actually. So what are the key challenges that affect the current state of quantum computing progress and development that we can overcome or are closest to overcome? I don't know.
I guess the big one is, sadly, is money. So, research, particularly on the hardware front, for hardware firms, an operation of sort of quantum computing costs money. And so there's big questions about government funding. And we're all aware that governments have many constraints on their revenues and many mouths to feed. But I would think, for me, I'd be thinking about how best, as we go forward, do we fund quantum research? How best do we follow the French model, where we give very large sums to relatively few firms, or do we follow the UK model where there's relatively small amounts of money, very small amounts of money given to lots of different firms and different universities? So there's a choice, and it's down to policymakers to A, decide how much money, and B, where that money goes. I think also we might think about private sector funding, and one of the issues that with private sector funding is basically quantum's not an easy industry to understand, and it's not an easy industry to provide information about. So there are big challenges, sort of both on public and private funding. So I would say, if you say what to me is the main challenge from where we are now to quantum being widely adopted, I would say it's about finances, and in particular government finances.
Okay, so as always, it's always about money. Yeah, I believe every single, well, not every single, but most of the industry problems that we have may be solved through money. But as we know, we don't have infinite money to solve every single problem. Um, um, it's going to be a difficult question maybe for you, but what's both of you? What's your opinion about the things that Andrew just stated? Should we, or what's in your thoughts? Should we give this small amount of money to like a lot of different companies and see how can they leverage that kind of money into something bigger, or should we try to aim for like bigger shots and give bigger amount of money to smaller companies? What do you think? Or maybe Gerald, you're from a company and you're a CEO, so maybe that's for you.
Yeah, no, it's obviously a really difficult choice from a policymaker point of view. I think there's probably though two separate questions in it. The first one is the quantity of funding that you actually invest into the sector, and the second one is how do you disperse that money? Do you disperse it to a limited number of companies, or do you spread it very thinly across many different companies and many different kind of segments of quantum? But I think the answer to the first question, though, in terms of the research that we've looked at, in terms of what we've seen internationally, I think the in terms of the importance of quantum to the economy, I think that has to be a significant investment. Now, the second order question about how you then use that money, in other words, dispersing it thinly or fragmenting it across a large number of companies, or on that basis actually focusing it in, I think that's a second order question. I think different approaches will be applied by different policymakers. But for me, the first order question on the amount of money, I do think significant investment is required. And that's the level of ambition that governments have with respect to quantum for their economies into the future. And I think importantly, there's probably a differentiation here. And I think we see this more broadly across a number of countries is, are we looking at something where we want a vibrant quantum ecosystem in that country, which the UK very much has, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But are we also then considering the extent to which we want sovereign quantum players in each country? In other words, the extent to which you want British quantum computing companies to be national champions, the extent to which you want French quantum computing companies to be national champions and global champions. That then becomes a choice for governments in terms of how they use their funding. I think we're probably seeing across the landscape globally is that there tends to be a bit more of a nationalist play in terms of their quantum players. And if that's the case, then other governments who don't do that, you might see challenges in terms of companies that are sovereign companies within those nation states. But I think for me, the first order question on the amount of money, I think it's a significant investment that's required, as Andrew was pointing out. And importantly, I think we can help to crowd in private investment through that public investment. So it's not the case it is always dependent or only dependent on public funds. That's not the case. It has a huge effect in terms of unlocking and also de-risking investment by private investors. And if we're wanting the kind of bigger funds from the US, from maybe the Middle East, or from APAC, that might be a requirement given the kind of current state of the venture capital industry in Europe.
Yeah, so I myself, talking about as David, I also agree. I think that both public and private funding has to happen in order to leverage this technology, because the risk is there, and the business also want to has less risk, or trying to like set up another technology, but we have to aim for this one. And maybe I'm putting Andrew on the spot, but you have been working in the banking sector for a long time. So do you agree with Gerald, or what's your opinion?
Definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just, at least in the UK, aware that there are lots of constraints on government revenue, but it's got to make some difficult choices. At least in the UK, we're about to have the comprehensive spending review. That's where they decide their priorities over the next 5 to 10 years, and we'll find out how much money quantum is going to get over that period, and it will be a big driver. Not the only driver, obviously, but it will be an important moment to see the degree of commitment financially that we're going to get in the UK.
Yeah, that's true. Coming back, another thing that Gerald was talking about the ecosystem, the overseas funding, and everything. So, Gerald, again for you, and also looking at the report. So, reading through the report, you can see that there are some concerns about these tech companies leaving the UK and Europe and moving overseas. Do you think that this is a concern for the European quantum sector? And if that's the case, what should we be doing as like companies or the consortia or the policymakers to prevent this?
Yeah, I think I'll focus first on the UK, and then I'll broaden it out to Europe. I think, as Laura Haig points out in the forward of the report, the UK is very fortunate. It holds significant advantages in the race for quantum. We have some of the strongest universities in science and technology in the world, and the large majority of quantum companies operating in the UK today either spun out of those universities or were founded right here in the UK. So the ecosystem today is vibrant, it is very strong, and it's in a lot of cases it's British as an ecosystem. Lots of players have come in and kind of set up in addition in the UK, which is great to see. So we do have a very vibrant ecosystem. We have seen some changes. So we've seen Quantinuum, a merger between Cambridge Quantum and Honeywell. And that's kind of, I think there's co-headquarters, but its main headquarters is in the US. You have PsiQuantum, and that's actually a spin out from the University of Bristol that relocated out of the UK and specifically to access capital. Today, PsiQuantum is one of the best funded quantum computing companies in the world. I think it's to the tune of about 1.4 billion, but I know that there's more coming. And it's about 50% private, but also 50% public investment. I think PsiQuantum have been relatively critical of the lack of public-private partnerships on this side of the Atlantic. And I think the report, as Andy mentioned, I think it backs it up, particularly from a UK standpoint. UK funding is about 10 times lower than what's available in peer nations. And we haven't yet seen, although we're really hopeful it is recommitted to, that the 2.5 billion that was announced by the last government today hasn't been recommitted to yet. But hopefully we'll see that, as Andy mentioned, in the spending review that's coming. There has been kind of year-on-year funding, but not a commitment to the longer-term funding overall. I think if we broaden it out and just think about the risks overall on this, I think the challenge is that sometimes what you don't see is you see a slow drift out of Europe. It's not that it's in a major move, that there's a huge move out of Europe to the US or to APAC, but rather it's a drift over time because of the funding landscape. In other words, sovereign investment it's very competitive for quantum companies at the moment. There is a lot of sovereigns very interested in investing in quantum, either through the raises that go through that each quantum company engages with, Series A, Series B, Series C, and etc., or actually in terms of just grant applications or tenders that they might put out from a competition point of view. I think what tends to come with some of that funding, though, is a criteria on setting up operations, and sometimes very significant operations, in those countries. And I think the risk is that we don't see the levels of investment into the ecosystem from a European standpoint. We might see a slow drift of the ecosystem out of Europe and to other locations where the funding environment is better, both private and public. And it's important to say that, the private investment is so important overall, but we do get kind of a bit of feedback from other quantum companies that are kind of experiences as they raise, that it can actually be quite challenging if you're a European headquartered and European quantum company to be able to access the significant levels of private investment in the US. Some do better than others at that, but in a lot of cases, even private US investors kind of want to see significant operations and it being kind of US based, being something you're accessing the US market. And that can become not with an explicit criteria to move it, more a general sense on it would be better if you had that operation or that manufacturing center or that capability in the US rather than in Europe. So I do think the financing side has a big effect in terms of the pathway that a quantum company can take into the future. But expectation wise, it won't be a risk that we'll see manifest immediately. The bigger worry is a drift over a period of time. And when we see actually these unicorn companies come out from a quantum point of view, they will be majority US or majority APAC, rather than being very strong European companies.
Okay. Yes, I think that we are at that spot, but I believe that with the new quantum strategy for Europe, we can drive more investment, public and also private. And I hope that we leverage our own technology, because I think we have a really strong players within Europe, and it's really bad that we have to look for that overseas, maybe the US as an example, because you said that funding or research centers, because here we have the people, the knowledge, the technology to leverage that, and maybe it's again the problem could be the money. But let's try to push that, and let's try to have the money in mind. But let's go for the next question that I have in mind, maybe for Andrew. So yeah, we know that the money is really important, but quantum is a key technological enabler for the countries and for different governments around the globe. So what do you think that the governments need to support? Okay, money, but what other things they need to support for leverage these quantum capabilities on quantum technologies, not only in computing, we are here talking about computing specifically, but as an open quantum technology?
I think part of the answer is also about effectively communicating and different people working together. And that means both government and private sector trying to sort of, in essence, spread the word, better understanding, better cooperation. All of that is relatively cheap and easy to achieve without lots of money. So I would push for that. I think that's important. It's easily said, and I know that the UK government has a quantum cross-department committee that meets once a quarter. I also know that the last one was cancelled, so that probably wasn't such a winner. But kind of generally communication, trying to everyone to sort of understand and push forward the boundaries, I would argue. I don't know if Gerald has a different view from being inside the sort of inside the industry.
I think there's a couple of things that we would suggest, and I think some countries have really done a great job on this overall, is that there are some significant investments, particularly quantum hardware companies, need to make. So as we kind of scale, we tend to move from our kind of academic grade clean room facilities to much more foundry level clean room facilities. But in that transition period, being able to access facilities that are maybe not foundry level at this stage, but are above academic grade clean room facilities, that's critical. And I think we've seen some really great moves in Europe across some of the countries. I would pick out France in terms of CEST. I think Fraunhofer in Germany. I hear about great things that are happening in Spain with both INAFAB and then also with IMEC Malaga. Also, I think these sorts of initiatives are fantastic, because that means for a quantum company, if you begin to outgrow the academic grade clean room facility, do you take a relatively limited amount of funding and invest in your own clean room, which is more commercial grade facilities, or are you able to leverage shared use or nationally available facilities for those fabrication requirements that you might have as a stepping stone towards the foundry level capabilities that do exist globally? I think that's a really important one, and that can be something that governments should focus on in terms of providing that type of access to their startup ecosystem. I think the other one, and I really hope we enter into this as a problem, because I think it means that we're scaling really fast and there's lots of challenges, is the talent side. We don't currently have an issue in terms of being able to recruit, let's say, quantum engineers or anything like that, and that maybe the position or the place that we have from a UK ecosystem and maybe a global perception also. But I imagine into the future, we're going to see very strong constraints on talent. I hope we get there, because that means the sector is growing a huge amount. But I think from a policymaker point of view, how best do we actually address that in an early stage to ensure that there's not massive challenges as companies scale? And on that basis, they do need to look towards other countries to be able to access that talent. So talent is always a consideration, always a challenge. But part of me sort of hopes that we actually enter into that challenge, because it means as an ecosystem, we have scaled, we have grown, and we require more and more talent from around the world.
Yeah, I would love to hear that actually, like that we are scaling up so big, and the talent, we have a lot of talent here, and maybe we can gather talent from outside also. But yeah, it will be a pity that we grow so fast that we die from the exit. I'm afraid I'm not on a point to say that that's going to happen soon, but the scale up, of course, is happening right now. There are some companies that are scaling up, just also Quantum Circuit, for instance, and many others. So we are running kind of out of time, and I want to ask a final question before we go to the actual Q&A that we have from the different chats. So with this report that you did, and then we will share again the QR code and the link with all the findings that you have from the report and some of them that you have in mind. Do you have any like suggestions or advice that the people, mainly the industry, but in general the people, should address right now? Open question, Andrew, Gerald, feel free.
Andrew, do you
Or
want to go?
maybe both. Yeah, Andrew, you go first.
Do I have any advice?
Or insights, maybe, not a direct advice.
I just find it I think the UK has gone, there are a number of discoveries in the past where the UK has got things very wrong, AI being one, where at points the UK was very good at AI in the sort of early times, but it's now gravitated towards the US, and most of the sort of push is US based. I'm very much hoping that that going forward we don't have the same story with quantum. That's not much advice. That's kind of more a horror story. I don't know if Gerald can actually offer some advice from inside the industry.
Yeah, I might build on that, because I think it's actually a good lesson overall, is that an AI Opportunities Action Plan was recently released in the UK. And I think when it was released, some of our politicians here were sort of lamenting the fact that there were no British AI companies that were at a global level at this stage, and they were kind of lamenting the loss of, it was DeepMind specifically, that is the kind of consideration of one, clearly a globally leading AI company that obviously now is part of Google. And I think maybe to draw on that is that one of the really impressive initiatives in that AI Opportunities Action Plan is a compelling case for sovereign AI compute. Given the economic impacts of the really great report that Andrew and team have done, and the significant national security considerations, I think there's an equally, if not more compelling case for sovereign quantum compute. So I think my concrete next step would be governments go and procure a sovereign quantum computing capability. And what I mean by that is that choose a consortium of the best hardware and software companies and let them compete to deliver you at least a megaquop system, and at least a system that can provide millions of quantum operations, because that's where quantum moved past the capabilities of classical compute, and that's where we see our first advantages, both in terms of industry advantages, but importantly for the economy also. That would also help to signal confidence and crowd in private investments. So that's definitely my suggestion to governments is go procure the capability. I think governments are the strongest when it's government as a customer. Go procure it, and I think the ecosystem will respond, and we might be able to accelerate that kind of pathway to trillions of quantum operations and those transformative impacts across our society and our economy.
Yeah. So yeah, the AI thing is there. So we may be a little late for that. Even though we are pushing like Euro HPC is starting with AI factories and everything through Europe. So we are trying to compete, but yeah, on the industry level, there are companies there that are from outside and are really doing a really good job. So thank you, and let's kick off for the Q&A. So let's see what our watchers are saying. So we have here a first question from Edmundo. So hi, do you only look at quantum computing applications or also at quantum sensors? Thanks. I believe it's going to be for Gerald. So in the chat, if you can address who do you want to ask?
Yeah, I might take it, and maybe Andrew, if there's anything else on this. So we specifically looked at quantum compute, both hardware and software. We didn't include sensing and communications in that, so that would broaden the impact more overall, which would be great. I think most of the research that I've seen and the other market research reports suggest that quantum computing will be the biggest economic impact overall, but at the same time, communications and sensing would add to the numbers that Andrew and team have developed. But this one is specifically focused on quantum computing, both hardware and software.
Okay, thank you. You have another one from Nico. So he's asking about his interest will be if there are considerations to install several different types of quantum computing platforms and QPU systems at the same place to compile programs and parallel or on one side?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think that the NQCC here in the UK has done really well. So the National Quantum Computing Centre, they've actually procured a number of different modalities of quantum. So the different like ion traps, neutral atoms, superconducting circuits, etc. And on that basis are kind of running kind of testing across each of those different modalities. I think there's obviously from a modality point of view, there's pros and cons of each. In addition, maybe to the modality question, it's also how best we're installing and integrating with classical compute. So in the UK, within the data center, we actually have NVIDIA's Grace Hopper super chip, and obviously that brings the CPU and GPU and our QPU together, and we integrate that to provide hybrid compute for our customers. I think we're seeing lots of that occurring globally, and I think we expect that even more so over the next while. I think whether we see different modalities actually, kind of coming together, I think that's a huge question for the sector. I think we're probably a little bit early to understand whether or not you have a single winning modality. We'll obviously make the strong argument for superconducting circuits as being by far the fastest modality at play. But overall, whether we actually see different modalities in the same location providing, let's say, for a single workload, different sorts of benefits for that workload, I think that's early stage, but it's a fascinating area of research, and it's a fascinating kind of future pathway for the industry. It may be the case certain modalities are just better at certain types of use cases, and on that basis, you'll need multiple different modalities in a single site to serve in various industries. Or we start to see kind of winners, different modalities winning, and on that basis being able to be the kind of broad-based general quantum computing platform.
Thank you. So we have talked about talent and industry, but we have another question here from Andy. So how do we grow quantum literate talent outside the research lab? So I guess how do we get them to the industry, or what are the industry needs? Because sometimes we are also always talking about physicists or PhD, but in general, what is the talent needed?
Yeah, this is a great question. I might approach it from a slightly different direction and then come back to the actual question itself. And what I mean by that is that at the moment, we have a quantum computer as a service platform. We can provide that to the industry. But there's actually a very small proportion of people that have the capability of programming directly a quantum computer and actually using a quantum computer today. One kind of approach to this is you expect the industry to all go to university, get a PhD in quantum algorithms, come back, and then explore a quantum computer. That's just not going to happen. In the same sense, I imagine David or Andrew, we haven't programmed anything to provide this sort of kind of video service to all of us today. We haven't done anything. It was a solution that was provided. We're really exploring how we actually lower the barriers for, let's say, a typical classically trained data scientist to be able to explore quantum. In other words, you're abstracting away from the quantum computer so that industry can actually utilize and benefit from the quantum solutions that are emerging. I think our sense on this, and we're doing lots of work on it, AI agents are going to be a fundamental part of that, right? It's an agentic era that we're entering into. It will lower the barriers for access in so many different ways, and it may be a really cool solution in addition for the quantum sector, which is on the face of it very complex. Now, that doesn't address the actual skill requirements that are needed within the industry overall, and that's important. And I think, in terms of the research labs itself, I think we're probably, as the sector itself grows, we'll probably see a typical thing that happens in other sectors, more mature sectors. In other words, apprenticeships. We have apprenticeships in our company. I think we'll see a broader base of that. In other words, you don't need to go through all of the levels of an academic career into PhD in order to be able to build and develop skill sets that you might require. I do think that's going to be a really important track for building quantum skill sets, and the more companies that are offering apprenticeships to the ecosystem, I think the better. Now, you can benefit from the policies that exist at a national level to promote and support apprenticeships, and we benefit that from a UK point of view. But I do think it's a really strong track for kind of building skill sets that doesn't require kind of 10 years within a lab environment before you actually come into a company environment.
I love the way you explain what a platform as a service is. I'm really astonished about the simple of the answer, but also the power of it, to fully understand that even though we didn't program the actual program that we are using, we can use that, and that extrapolation to other techniques and talent, I believe it's wonderful. So with this, we are getting. We have another question also from Andy. So last one, because we are running out of time. So how should Europe lead on ethical, secure quantum, post-quantum crypto, expert controls, dual-use tech, etc.?
Yeah, I think a really good way in which I think we can approach this is through very strong principles that this is kind of, we're in an era at the moment where if we over-regulate the sector, we will impact its growth, right? That's definitely the case. And we're seeing kind of export controls as a kind of a typical thing that governments are putting in place. Overall, and we fully understand the background of the reasoning for that and so on. There's not a disagreement overall with the need in places, because it is a dual-use technology. It is a very sensitive technology into the future. And we fully understand the kind of policymakers' position with respect to export controls. But I think if there's too much regulation that comes, we can stifle the innovation that might be required within the industry. But at the same time, we do need to make sure it is ethical, it is secure quantum. And I think one of the approaches that tends to work when there's kind of an era of kind of full regulation in a sector is to have a set of principles that policymakers, industry, and academia sign up to. I think there's a lot of people in quantum, and I say this with respect to my team, they're in it because of the purpose. They're in it because of the good that quantum can bring to the world, and that's what really drives them. And I think we've got a sector that is kind of based on that level of purpose, that would sign up to really good principles that ensure that we're then aligning as an industry, as a sector, toward the good for that quantum can do rather than other. And I think that might be a good way in which we could do it at a European level, we can do it at a national level, but those sort of principles that are ethical, that move towards the security of quantum, but also don't stifle its innovation and the growth that is required. I think that might be a good way of proceeding.
Yeah, I'm following on that. QuiC has a working group about ethical and societal impact, so feel free to join and to leverage this working group and the work that we are doing there, because we believe that is a really important thing, and also like the purpose, as you say, for all the quantum industry. So with this last question, we are at the end of our time. Thank you. I want to really thank Andrew and Gerald for being here with us and to share the insights and the report and everything. Also, remember to visit our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, like the videos, subscribe, like the usual things in these social platforms. And I'm David Morquende, and see you at the next QWave. Thank you.